Hi, and welcome to episode 49 of the Give Me a Crown Knitting, Spinning and Bits and Pieces podcast. My name's Nina, also known as Give Me a Crown on Ravelry, Instagram, Pinterest, and it's also the name of my Etsy shop. And today is Monday the 12th of September 2016. I'm coming to you from a little village in the central west of New South Wales in Australia, and it's lovely to have your company. Show notes for this podcast, which I often forget to mention, can be found at givemeacrown.com/podcast. So there I will list the various things that I've been chatting about and provide links. I would like to start this episode off by mentioning the Give Me Colour Knit Along or Craft Along that is currently running in the Give Me a Crown Ravelry group. It's running until the 31st of October, so you've got plenty of time to still take part, and the idea is basically to work on a project that has at least 2 different colourways in it. The first finished object has already landed in the finished objects thread, which is fantastic to see, and I think I forgot to mention in last week's episode that I hadn't quite got my prizes lined up yet, but I do now, so I wanted to share those. So the first finished objects prize is going to be a skein of yarn from Stray Cat Socks. So this is the Audrey colourway, and it's a beautiful self-striping yarn, which I thought would be perfect after having worked on some colour work to be able to knit on some yarn that does all the colour work for you. So I've placed that order and it's currently being made or dyed, and it should be here in a couple of weeks, so I'll be able to show that off on the podcast before too long. The next prize is going to have a secret criteria, so I'm not going to announce exactly what the criteria is, but this prize has been donated by a lovely podcast viewer, and you'll be able to win a skein of yarn from Black Stump Studio. So Black Stump Studio is a new yarn dyeing studio from Linda, and she has kindly donated 1 skein of the winner's choice from her shop. So these are just some of the examples of yarns that she has. She's got lace weight, fingering weight, DK weight, and lots of beautiful colours. So I strongly recommend that you go and check out Black Stump Studio on Etsy and have a look at the yarns that she has. And thank you, Linda, for offering up a skein of yarn. We also have a third finished objects prize. So the wonderful Cyber Frog from the Ravelry group has offered up a pattern prize, and the pattern that she has chosen to give to a winner is the Blossom Field pattern by Meg Gadsby. So I showed this off last week because it's a beautiful shawl, and it can be done with 2 colours for the body and the lace section, or it can be done with 1 colour. But it is a beautiful tie-in to the fact that this knit along is running during spring here in the southern hemisphere. So somebody will be able to win that beautiful pattern. So thank you, Cyberfrog, for offering that. We also will have a Chatter Thread prize. So in the past week I went to Bathurst, which is a town near here, and I went looking at some fabric shops that I haven't been to before, and I went looking for colourful fabrics, and I thought that this one was very nice. It's got some spots. So this is a snap project bag, sort of a sock size, 1 to 2 skeins, and it has a snap so that if you want to do some colour work, you can then feed your yarn through in between the snaps so that your yarn balls don't get tangled. It has a nice wide gusset at the bottom so that your yarn balls can sit in there comfortably, and it has the Give Me a Crown label stitched on the inside. I thought that this fabric could potentially be used by men or women, so don't be afraid, men. I know that there are some of you out there watching the podcast, and if you want to take part in the knit along, then hopefully it's not too feminine for your liking. So I think it's a fun bag. So that is one of the prizes. So that's 4 prizes all up, and I think that's the most that we've had on this podcast before. So thank you very much to Linda and to Cyberfrog for getting in touch and offering some prizes. On to my finished object. So I'm wearing it. So this is a shawl that I've been working on. That's a bit hard to show. I haven't had a chance to do my photos that I've been planning to do, so hopefully in the next few days I'll finally get those done. But this shawl is one of my own designs, and you can't really see too much from there, but if I come up close you should be able to see that there's some subtle texture going on in there. So my idea with this shawl was that it would be just a nice fun knit where you sort of take advantage of the colours in the yarn and just have a subtle amount of texture to go along with it. I kind of think this might be a bit of a unisex shawl pattern because it's not lacy, it doesn't get too sort of frilly or anything like that. So again, if there's any men out there who are watching, I'd be interested to know your thoughts. Would you wear something like this? Not necessarily in this colourway knit, but in some other colour. This shawl is perfect for lighter coloured plump yarns, especially singles. So I've got my previous version, which I knit, I think was it late last year, early this year, and this is in some hand spun, and it's very hard to see the texture in there, so there's a little bit of visibility in it, but this pattern definitely isn't going to work for dark yarns unless they're super plump and it's being knit on a thicker yarn. But yeah, so my current sort of plan with it is to write it up and maybe put it out there. So I'd be interested to know your thoughts once I get the photos to properly demonstrate it. It's very hard on camera to do it. But one interesting thing with this was that I've been hearing on some podcasts lately about skeins of yarn that don't have the dye going all the way through the skein, and this is an example of that. So you can see one end has a very saturated sort of colour to it, and the other end, which I knit last, is paler. It's not a huge difference, and it doesn't bother me at all, but it was just interesting to see that, especially hearing other podcasters talking about it. I've never run into it before, so this was the first time, and I kind of wish that I'd have had this darker end at the other end. Where am I? This way. I wish I'd have had the darker end at this wider end, and then it would have, I think it might have balanced things out a little bit, and just with the way that it gets worn. But I think overall you can't see it. So it was just interesting to notice that. So I'm not sure if I mentioned, but so this yarn was Skein Uptown Sock in the pollen colourway. I'm definitely still going to be ordering this yarn again, but I probably would not use it for a garment, for instance. Not that I'm not sure if using a singles yarn for a garment makes that much sense, but it could actually be an interesting effect on a hat. So to get a hat that sort of changes from darker to slightly lighter, but then I think you'd have to pay attention when you're making the ball that you know which end to start from. So that's that one. I have also been working on my Isla top. So this one has had a little bit of progress. So from last week I have finished sort of knitting along the back, and I joined it up into the round, and I'm now just knitting around. You'll notice that I've got my cable stoppers on there at the moment because I'm using the same needles on this as on another project, so I'm having to take them off and switch them between projects as I'm working on them, which is probably a sign that I really do need an extra pair of these needles, but I'll keep going. So it's coming along okay. I've put it on. I put another cable on there and tried it on, and it's actually feeling larger than I expected it to, which is a little bit worrying considering that this yarn is going to bloom and it's actually going to get wider again. So I'm not entirely sure why that's going on at the moment, and it might just be because of where it's currently hitting on my body, but it's coming along. I think I've got a few more inches to go before I'm going to start the striping with the other yarn, but it'll be interesting to see how that works. So that's that one. I was also interested to know that I'm not the only one who found the pattern instructions a little bit confusing, so it's good to be able to chat about patterns with other people and get their thoughts, because I thought perhaps I'm the only one who's scratching my head about the strange way that some of the instructions have been written. My next work in progress are my Rose City Rollers socks. So I finished one, and I think I was up to the toe last week, so I've done my standard toe. I didn't even look at the pattern to sort of figure out what I should be doing, but I really like how it's turned out. It fits well. I haven't sort of really worn it around because I've only got one at the moment, so I'm still interested to know how it's going to wear, because this is a cotton wool polyamide and elastin yarn, which looks like that. Hot socks, cotton stretch. I've got the next sock on the go, so I haven't gotten very far yet. But what I ended up doing is I had half a ball left of the yarn, and I think I had 26 grams, so I'd used 24 for the first sock, so I figured that I've got enough in the one ball to do both socks, which is great. But I decided that after my recent sort of stripy sock knitting where things looked a little too matchy but slightly off, I decided to rewind the leftover yarn so that I would be knitting it in reverse. So the colours on the second sock are going to be opposite to what they are on the first. So I'll be interested to see how that looks. I think it'll look perfectly fine, and definitely not matchy. My next work in progress is my Taskutaki, which is a cardigan by Veera Välimäki, and it's available in English in a book called Colour Wheel Knits, which is also available on Ravelry as a download. So this is how it looks so far. It's just a lot of ribbing, and it's actually the button band, so it will... Wow, there's a siren going on outside. It's very peculiar. It's not very often that you hear a siren, but hopefully whoever needs that siren is okay. So, yep, it's a button band, but it's not going to have any buttons on it. It's an open front cardigan, but it sort of gets knit from here, and then you knit the fronts, I think, and the pockets. Then you somehow knit the back in another direction, and then you knit the sleeves, and sort of read through the pattern a little bit, but I haven't read it in its entirety. So I'm kind of allowing the construction to occur however it needs to occur. And it's perhaps nice to be able to get this much ribbing out of the way before I get into the stockinette stuff, so get the more boring stuff done first. Not that I mind ribbing too much, but what I have done is I've got 2 balls of the Nightman's Highway in the Junkyard Dog colourway from Miss Click Clack. I've balled them up and I'm alternating skeins, and I've never alternated skeins for an entire project, so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. I'm not bothered by it so far, but I haven't exactly done very much. So I think what I'm going to do, I've got 2 at the moment, I think I will get through about halfway, then I'll swap one of the balls out for another skein. Once I finish the other one, swap it out. So I'll sort of be alternating at different parts, because of the way that this is constructed, I'm worried about having an obvious colour change between the back and the front, I guess. But I've not had any problems with colours with Miss Click Clack yarns, and I took a photo of the skeins in black and white before I cast on, just to sort of have a look and see if there was any major difference in the tonality of the yarns. I couldn't see anything, so I don't think there's going to be any problems, and if there are, they're not going to be problems, they'll be features. So haven't got very far, but it's a start, and it's my least sort of, not that any of my projects are urgent, it's least necessary of my projects because the weather is warming up. So I think I'll make sure that my Isla top gets priority at the moment. I've also done some spinning. So for people who have watched the podcast before, you will notice that my braider fibre up here has disappeared, and that is half of it spun up on my jumbo bobbin. I've been staring at it and wanting to spin it, and I kept thinking that there's some perfect way to spin this, and if I couldn't figure out the perfect way, then there was no point spinning it. And that's just a bit silly, because there's always more fibre to be bought if the need arises. So I'm considering it's called autumn and it's now spring, I figured it was about time to get on with it. So it's got beautiful greens, oranges, reds, browns in there, and I decided to just spin this end to end. So I opened up the braid and folded it back over on itself so that it was just sort of the 2 parts of the braid, pulled it apart and checked that both of the sections were equal weight, so they were both 50 grams, and then I just started prepping the fibre and spinning. So I thought that I would show a little bit about what I do. So this is sort of most of the second part of the braid, and what I do is I pull off a section, something like this, and I don't know sort of which particular types of fibres do this, but you'll see that there's a little bit of a sort of indent in there, and I read somewhere that it's actually the fibre that's been folded in on itself. So if you gently prise it open, you actually get a sort of larger, flatter piece, something like that. What I then do, and this isn't with all fibres, I just find that with sometimes when dye has been used, there can be little clumps, and just from the compression of the fibre sitting around somewhere. So I just sort of gently tug away at it horizontally, just to loosen up any clumps that are there. So then it becomes even wider still. Once that's done, previously I was trying to spin back and forth, which is a technique that I want to try to learn, across this width of fibre, and it just makes it hard to handle because my hand is that big. I'm trying to hold it gently and I keep on losing bits off the side. So what I figured out the other day when I was spinning this one is that I could just fold it back in two, and then that's a much more manageable size of fibre. Once it's like that, I still give it a bit of a tug. Now I usually do this on my resting my hands on my knees a little bit, because they help me manage the tension. Just sort of stretching it out a little bit gives the fibres a little bit more air. If you pull too hard, then the fibres will pop out, but that doesn't matter. You just need to join it up as you're spinning. So something like that, it creates a slightly longer piece, and I think it sort of also helps join the two parts together a little bit so that they will still stay in your hand quite comfortably. So I think that's much easier to spin than straight off the braid when it's sort of squished up. So that's how I kind of draft my fibres to make them easier to spin. Hope that was interesting. I don't think there's much more to say about that one, but I have also got some acquisitions, and they're spinning related acquisitions, so hold on. This morning I went to visit my wonderful local Ashford distributor, and I picked up some things that I had ordered. So one is a finishing wax polish, and I figured that this might be good to use on my wheel and also on my jumbo bobbins that I ordered recently. I got a fly bearing set because my wheel, my traditional wheel, doesn't have this bit on it, and it's actually been hard with my jumbo flyer to release my bobbin, so that's going to help because I can just lift it out. I got a tension knob. So my wheel is a second-hand wheel that I picked up, and it has a doorknob with a stick as a tension knob, and it doesn't really hold place, so that's going to be helpful. And then I also got a maintenance kit. So this has got some oil, it's got a drive band, one of the little leather things for the treadle, hooks, all sorts of things. So that's going to come in handy just to get my wheel spinning a little bit easier. While I was there, she also kindly gave me some fibre. So there's a few different things in here. Eek. So there's this. Now we think this might be merino. She wasn't sure. It was something that she's been given. It's got a beautiful crimp to it. It's got the lanolin in it, and I'm just going to give this a bit of a wash and see how it washes up. And then if it works well, then I'm going to be getting some more from her. So it's got that sheepy smell, but look at that crimp. It's amazing. I also got, it's so precious, this. So this is one of her alpacas, some of the fleece, and it's incredibly soft and amazing and wonderful. Very little vegetable matter. We were having a look at some of her different alpaca fleeces, and we've got sort of plans to go through them to have a look at what can be done with them. But I got some to play with, and it's a fairly sizable chunk there, but it's amazing. So this is very local from down the road. Amazing. So I think, I'm not sure if I'll get to these this week, but at some point down the track I will definitely be giving these fibres a bit of a wash and a play and see how they spin up. That's it for this week's show. Yeah, apart from a bit of chatter at the end, but if you're not interested in that, then thank you for watching. I have been very busy in the past week, but it's good busy, it's fun busy, and there's definitely that feeling of spring in the air and also the end of the year being sort of fairly close. International orders in the shop are definitely up, and people seem to be getting ready for the gift giving season, so it's definitely making me realise that I need to stock up on some fabrics. So I went into Bathurst, which is about 45 minutes drive away, and I explored a few of the fabric shops that are there, picked up some goodies which will be popping up in the shop pretty soon. But so it was fun to see Bathurst. I spent a few hours there, so it's not like I got to see the whole of the city or town. I'm not sure which classification it falls under, but I visited a few shops, had a look around. It was all very pretty and lots of flowers in bloom, and definitely green. This area is a lot more green than I expected it to be, because when I've travelled around this part, it's usually been around December, January, at which point usually it's very brown and sunburnt, but at this time of year it's absolutely beautiful. So while I've been driving, haven't quite got into the whole audiobook thing that I was trying recently, but I decided to give knitting podcasts a whirl, so the audio knitting podcasts, because I've never really gotten into them. There's one that I listen to on my computer now and then, but I hadn't sort of loaded them up on my phone. So I've been listening to back episodes of Curious Handmade by Helen Stewart, and they're perfect. There's something about the pace of her talking, the topics that she talks about, the length of time that she talks about them, and the length of her episodes that seems to work really well with the journeys that I've been driving. So I'm really enjoying that, but I'm also interested to know if you happen to listen to knitting audio podcasts or crafting podcasts. I'd love to know who you're listening to, and maybe I can check them out as well. So that's it. I hope that you're well. I hope that you're having lots of crafting time and enjoying everything that you're doing. If you are interested in the colourwork knit along, then please pop by the Ravelry group, and I'll see you soon.